Hello and welcome back to another Pokemon Journeys video. Today we're going to be reviewing the Darkest Day arc as a whole. I know I've done my mini episode reviews, but I wanted to go into a bit more detail and talk about things I think the arc did well and things I thought the arc could have done a lot better. So be sure to let me know what you thought about the arc in the comments, and I hope you enjoy. So starting us off, I want to talk about the setup for the arc. After the Sword and Shield Edition 4-part arc was announced, many people were a bit confused because we've only been to Galar 3 times at this point. The second time was when Ash met Leon, learned all about Dynamax and got himself a Dynamax band, and then he had his battle with Leon, and also watched the battle between Lance and Leon. The setup for the Darkest Day arc on this occasion was minimal. While Ash and Go were on the plane to Galar, they saw a giant Pokemon sweeping through the clouds, and it was of course Eternatus. So there was a little bit of setup all the way back in episode 12, which still shows that they knew the arc was coming. We also saw a Dynamax Dreadnought start rampaging, which could also be seen as a little bit of foreshadowing to what happened in the arc, and Ash had to deal with the Dreadnought and stop it from going berserk. But I feel these first 2 episodes were more set up for the Pokemon World Championship and Ash's major goal rather than the Darkest Day. The third time Ash and Go went to Galar was yet again to watch another World Championship battle, this time between Leon and Raihan, where of course Leon ended up winning. There was a little bit more Darkest Day setup in episode 27 as we get introduced to Chairman Rose for the first time. We also see Sonia and the hero statue, and she explains to us all about the Darkest Day that happened years ago. And that's it. This is all the setup that we got for this arc. I can see how some people might feel we needed a little bit more, but I don't think it was that big of a problem. I think the arc would have came off a little bit smoother if we had 1 or 2 more episodes to set things up, as I think episode 2 of the Darkest Day arc really had a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of monologue to get through to the audience. But overall the setup for the arc wasn't that bad in my opinion, it just could have been done better. So now I want to talk about the individual episodes and how they all added up in this arc. The first episode was a perfect basis to start off the arc. I gave this a 9 out of 10 in my review because I don't think they did anything wrong. It set up the main problem with the energy spots appearing all around Galar, Ash and Go being tasked by the professor to go and research it, but the perfect thing was the twist. Ash and Go were initially heading to meet with Professor Magnolia, but that got interrupted. Instead the train is stopped and the first episode splits Ash and Go up, which I think is a great aspect of this arc, as we're now seeing things from 2 different viewpoints. And now we can cover more ground in Galar by having Ash and Go being split up, and of course they reunite at the end to wrap things up, but this first episode sets everything up nicely without overloading us with too much information. Also Ash and Go meet the 2 legendaries Zacian and Zamazenta without really knowing too much about them, and then they both set out on their journeys, Ash with Leon and Go with Sonia, which leads perfectly into the second episode, which is the setup episode. Personally I think this is the weakest episode. I only gave it an 8 out of 10, but it's still a very good episode. It just has a lot of monologue, as I said before, with Sonia, Magnolia and Chairman Rose all giving us a lot of information about Galar and about what is happening. So this episode would have benefited for more setup for the arc, but it was still a solid episode and it had some great moments like Ash and Rose at dinner, with Ash rejecting his offer and then Go meeting with Magnolia, getting his band and Dynamax reboot right at the end. So the third episode was one of the best in my opinion, as it carries straight on from the previous one, with the battle between Go and Reboot ending and Go getting a really good win. And then this episode just continues to develop the story all the way through on both Ash's side and Go's side. Go goes back to the Slumbering World to collect the rusted sword and shield. Meanwhile Ash and Leon are dealing with a massive situation as Eternatus has broken free. So this episode is setting up the final battle with Eternatus really well, as Leon and Ash face this giant Pokemon. And I really enjoy how these episodes end off with everyone facing their own battles. Ash is battling Rose and Go is battling Olena after arriving in Hammerlock with Sonia. So episode 3 was great, and I even gave this one a 10 out of 10. And then the final episode of the arc was executed perfectly in my opinion, even becoming probably one of my favourite episodes of Pokemon Journey so far, along with 37 and 32. This episode was cut into 2 halves, the first half focusing solely on the evolutions of Lucario and Cinderace. Massive moments for both Ash and Go in particular, and Ash having a Lucario after years and years of fans waiting for this to happen. So the fact that these 2 evolutions took place in this arc made the arc even better, as we've got something from the arc as a whole. We're coming out with 2 brand new Pokemon, and despite being majorly spoiled in the opening and other promotional material, they were both still very satisfying to watch. As for the second half of the final episode, this was the climactic finale between our heroes and Eternatus. Ash and Go come into the front lines to help out Leon in a great final battle where they took place as the player and Hop wielding the sword and shield to summon Zacian and Zamazenta, which was cool, and they of course defeat Eternatus, and Ash and Go make a joint effort capturing it and sealing it away for good. So it was a perfect wrap up to the arc as a whole. So how does this arc compare to the Sword and Shield games? Well, firstly, you can draw many similarities between Ash and Go with the player character and Hop from the games. They both get sucked into the slumbering world unknowing of what's there and end up discovering the legendaries. Then Ash goes on to aid Leon and become quite close with him, which is also similar to the player. And then he even gets asked for dinner with Rose, but instead of going to the seafood restaurant in Hulbury, they eat dinner atop the Rose Tower. Discussing the future of Galar, and Rose asks Ash to help him out, so there is a few similarities with that also. As far as the actual starting plot goes, there is a few things similar to the games. Dynamax spots are randomly appearing around Galar and making giant Pokemon rampage, which we see in the games, but we don't actually deal with. It's usually left to Leon to deal with while we take on the gym challenge. But in this, Ash is directly helping out Leon with taking down these Pokemon, which is a great change they made. Also, we see in the post game of Sword and Shield a bunch of Pokemon randomly Dynamaxing, which is similar to what's happening here. As far as Eternatus goes, it's pretty much the same as the games. Rose has been harbouring this creature, storing all of the Dynamax power inside its little cocoon, and eventually it got released at the end. Another big change from the games was that when Sonia is researching the Darkest Day in Stowonside, she uncovers the hero statues, but it's not because of Bede. Is because of a Dynamax reboot crashes into the wall while battling, which was a nice change. Another small change I noticed was the wishing star that fell for Go fell outside the Pokemon lab rather than falling outside Professor Magnolia's house. We didn't actually see her house, she was in the lab the whole time, which we rarely saw her in there in the games. So the last episode had a few differences from the games. Ash battled Rose similar to the player character, but instead of it taking place where the broken egg was underneath Hammerlock, it took place in the stadium itself, where you'd normally battle Raihan. This was actually pretty cool, as Ash will most likely not be battling in many of the gyms in Galar, so this checks one of them off the list. Olena is battling Go on the other hand, so instead of her facing the player, which would take place atop Rose Tower in Wyndon, and instead this just takes place in the Hammerlock corridor. I thought this was also a nice change, as we don't see her use her G-Max Garbodor. Instead, one of her goons used that against Go in Stowonside. And finally, the battle with Eternatus went down pretty much the same. Eternatus goes into its Eternamax form, and it's pretty hard to deal with, so Zacian and Zamazenta are summoned, with Ash wielding the sword and Go wielding the shield. It's interesting that they decided to give the sword to Ash. I don't think it means anything other than the fact that Ash is more of a battler, so they wanted to give him the attacking Pokemon rather than the defensive Pokemon. And maybe Zacian and Zamazenta could play a bigger role in Pokemon journeys down the line. And then rather than just one person catching Eternatus and keeping it, Ash and Go jointly capture it, and it's buried underground, so it can't escape and cause havoc ever again. Now, a lot of people are complaining that Go has caught Eternatus. I don't really think that's the case. I mean, yes, it did register his Pokedex, but also it was his Pokeball. That's probably why it registered to his Pokedex. And he doesn't actually own it because he just left it underground with them. And also it was a joint capture with Ash just to protect everyone, so I don't think everyone should get worked up about Go capturing it. And then Ash and Go leave the Sword and Shield at the resting place, just like in the games, with the differences being that they don't battle each other there and they don't capture Zacian or Zamazenta. Also, something important to note is that Rose and Olena have gone missing, whereas in the games Rose is arrested, so that's interesting. Hopefully we can see him again in Pokemon Journeys. But that is about most of the changes I can think of from the games, but let me know if you spotted any more. So my final conclusion for this arc is that it was done really well. They nailed the storyline of Sword and Shield, made a few changes here and there which benefited the story. The setup, like I said, could have been better, but I don't think it affected this arc much at all. It just would have made episode 2 less dialogue based, and of course the final episode was my favourite, as it just wrapped everything up perfectly. So overall this arc gets a rating of 9 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed this Darkest Day review. Please give me your thoughts in the comments of the arc as a whole. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? And what would you rank it out of 10? But thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.